Good afternoon. Almost a full front row here. Banner day. Hi. Oh, good to have you. I have nothing at the top. On your toes, Matt.
Okay,
Kick
well,
us off.
I wanted to start with something that is not the biggest news of the day, but I want to get it out of the way because I think that you won't have a whole lot to say about it. And that is,
Great.
what can you tell us about this State Department employee in London who has apparently been charged in Atlanta for sextortion?
The individual named in this case was a locally hired administrative support employee who was not a member of the Foreign Service. As of May 18th, the individual is no longer working at the embassy. I can't comment on criminal cases, obviously, would refer you to DOJ for anything further.
So that means that they were not employed as a result of the charges?
I don't have more than that to share with you.
And May 18th is not that long ago.
I don't have more to share with you.
He was arrested on the 17th, so that would make sense.
I'm happy for you to keep giving me facts that have been reported. I don't have anything additional to share with you.
All right.
Yep, keep going.
One more question on that.
I don't have more to share with you, but you're happy to ask. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Marie.
Well-
Do you have a title for him? Did he have an official title?
If you were listening, I just
No,
said
I know. I
he was a
listening. I'm
locally
asking for the
hired
title.
administrative support employee.
That was his title. Okay.
That's what I have. That's all I have about him. I just read to you.
This isn't about him specifically, but what is an administrative support employee in general?
I'm happy to check if there's more.
All right, so.
Someone who provides administrative support.
Yeah, but I know, does that
I
mean
don't
like
know
data
that.
entry or whatever?
I do not
Anyway, it was
know.
not a foreign service officer and no longer employed.
Correct.
Fair enough, okay. Right, so let's go to the Cuba talks this morning.
Okay?
Are they over? And even
have-
if they're not,
Yes. I don't have a readout for folks yet on what's happened today. Hopefully we'll get one later today or tomorrow morning.
were you expecting going into these talks that you would have that this would be the round to get something?
I don't think we were expecting that, no.
All
Are you
right.
suggesting the talks will run into tomorrow possibly?
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I was saying I may not. I'll get a readout as quickly as I can. And if we can't get it tonight, we'll get it tomorrow.
You don't know if they've broken for lunch?
I'm sorry, I don't. I've been running around in other meetings.
Clarify, did you say you were not expecting there to be some kind of framework or any deal from this round?
I'm not sure what will come out of it. Honestly, I don't want to get ahead of the talks. As we have more to share, we will.
Is it fair to say the U.S. is closer to saying yes to a deal than Cuba at this point?
I don't think I want to do that kind of speculation, given the talks are ongoing. I think we'll probably have more to say when they conclude.
Can you give us an update of how far the talks got today? Did they cover a
I don't have any
large
other readout from today.
group of subjects or not?
I don't have any more readout from today. Again, we'll have more to share shortly, I think. Sure.
Okay. Now that there are some calls to sort of arm the Sunnis, the Sunni tribes, and there was calls in the past to arm the Kurds in the north, it seems like there is a division where Russia is arming the Shias and you guys are arming the Sunni. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I don't think that's a fair assessment. We've provided an enormous amount of assistance through the Central Iraqi government, who has been working very closely with the Kurdish forces, with the Peshmerga, with their national forces, who we think should be doing this fighting here. So obviously, that's what we've been focused on.
So, I know you talked about this before, but in terms of what's going on in Ramadi now, you are quite fine with having the popular mobilization, which are the Shia militias, taking a major part in the liberation of Ramadi.
Well, I think I'd say a few things. First is that I understand that the Prime Minister and the folks leading this effort have been working with the government, within the government, the different sectarian pieces of it, to make sure everyone is okay with the different forces they have helping fight this fight when it comes to Ramadi. And they've been doing this, I think, in a fairly transparent and open way. We've always said that this needs to be all coordinated under control, command and control of the government forces. That's been something that's very important to us as well.
How, those who assumed responsibility for defending Ramadi and Anbar were basically Sunni tribes, and I know them, I know how they work and so on. They've had a lot of grievances in the past. Maybe you should have sort of direct talks with them, independent of the government.
Direct talks with who?
Direct with the tribal Sunni
we're
leaders.
certainly talking to tribal leaders directly.
Much like General Petraeus did back during the awakening.
Well, it's a very different situation, and I would caution people from drawing too many direct parallels, but we certainly have direct conversations with tribal leaders, absolutely.
And you are willing to supply them directly with
all
arms?
of our assistance has to be coordinated and gone through the central government, who is working very closely with these tribal leaders.
Same topic?
Sure.
No.
Same topic?
Is it on Syria?
That was a very emphatic no. Hello.
Hello.
Playing the role of Arshad today.
Yeah,
Same
just-
topic?
Well, related to ISIL and the coalition
Okay.
fight.
Is your question also on this?
Thanks. Just on the reports that, that not only on Ramadi, but also that ISIL has taken Palmyra in Syria as well. Is there any thinking that this calls for a reevaluation of the coalition strategy, given that ISIL seems to be gaining a lot of momentum here in both Iraq and Syria?
Well, a few points. First, if you look at the overall picture, ISIL's lost about 25% of the populated area it has controlled at the beginning of this conflict. So if you look at in Iraq, correct, in Iraq. So if you look at the overall picture, there have been gains made against ISIL, particularly in Iraq. And we always have been clear, very clear, that there will be ebbs and flows here. And there will be days like we've seen with Ramadi. And this is going to be a very contested fight. There will be days, again, like we saw in Ramadi, there will be more of them. But overall, if you look at the general trajectory, we have helped the Iraqis push them back out of territory in Iraq. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of tough days, and that in no way is sort of downplaying the really serious challenge they're facing in Ramadi.
Okay.
It's a serious one. But I think, the national security team continues to meet and talk and evaluate the strategy and what it looks like going forward, as we always do.
I guess my question was I appreciate the response. I guess my question was not relating to Iraq per se, but more in
In
the
Syria.
overall in Syria as well, given that the current status quo tends to be that ISIL is gaining not only in Iraq, but also in Syria.
Well, I don't think overall ISIL is gaining in Iraq if you look at the overall picture. But when we talk about Syria, that's a little bit of a different challenge. We've been very focused on helping the Iraqis push ISIL out of Iraq. We've been now training and equipping Syrian opposition forces to get better at fighting inside Syria. That's going to take a little more time here. So Syria is a bit of a bigger challenge, and we know that.
And then the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says now that ISIL controls more than half of the territory of Syria. Is that your assessment?
We
as
don't
well?
agree with their calculations on this. We certainly don't deny that ISIL holds significant territory in Syria, but we don't agree with those calculations.
What do you have an alternative calculation?
Let me
to
see
offer?
if we have one we can share.
49%?
I'm happy to check.
Oh.
I don't think we're being too cute by half there, so to speak.
Can I
I think it's a lot different, but let me check.
can I pick up on the question?
Wait, Leslie, did you have a question?
It actually
Sorry.
I was listening because these questions were good, but I was also going to ask about that human rights group because that's what they're saying.
Okay.
But then you also said that you're reviewing the strategy. How far along is that review of the strategy? And
To be clear, there's no formal strategy review. This is an ongoing process we always have of taking stock of what's happening on the battlefield in a variety of places and how best strategically and tactically to approach the situation. So I do want to be very clear. There's no formal strategy review here. It's really just part of an ongoing process of looking at what's happening on the battlefield and determining the best way to go forward.
Why isn't there a formal strategy review?
Because we have in place a strategy that we believe is the right one to eventually achieve our goals. And in Iraq, for example, we've talked a lot about Ramadi, and that is a serious setback. We have had success in helping the Iraqis push ISIL out of a lot of its territory. And that in a long conflict like this, there will be days like we saw in Ramadi, and there will be ebbs and flows. But we believe the strategy we have is the right one, is the right framework moving forward.
So you think that these are both Ramadi and Palmyra are going to be short-term gains for ISIL?
We believe that ISIL eventually will be defeated in Ramadi and elsewhere in Iraq. Yes, we do.
What about in Syria?
That's a tougher challenge. That's certainly the goal. That requires a little bit different tools here, but it requires us continuing to support the opposition. It's a tougher challenge, certainly, but that is also our goal there. Yes.
Do you believe ISIS is on the defensive? As the Pentagon said last week, they used the word defensive.
Well, I think this is a situation, again, and I'm not a military expert, but where on the battlefield things ebb and flow. And in certain places, they absolutely are on the defensive. If you look at the populated areas we've pushed them out of, helped the Iraqis push them out of, I should say, they certainly are in a number of places. But we also saw a very aggressive offensive from them in Ramadi. And if you look at what was happening on the ground and what the Iraqi forces encountered, it was a very, very significant offensive from ISIL. And we've always said they have quite a bit of capability still, even as they're pushed back, much more than groups, for example, like AQI ever had. So we know this is going to be a tough fight here. Yes.
Pick up on the there may be no formal review of the strategy, but yesterday a senior State Department official briefed a few reporters and said you are taking an extremely hard look
Absolutely.
at what happened.
We do, and we do that all the time, right? When you look at different times during this conflict, whether it was Mount Sinjar, whether it was retaking Mosul Dam, whether it's there's different sort of flashpoints in this conflict where we do prudently take a look at the strategy and tactics and what's best moving forward. That is true, and that I think is indicative of the fact that we are not sugarcoating what happened in Ramadi here and how it is very serious.
So what about on Palmyra? How concerned is the administration about the loss of Palmyra?
In the same way, we've talked about the destruction or possible destruction of other historic sites, whether it's in Iraq or Syria. We've spoken out very strongly against this, and that's certainly a concern. Palmyra has been caught in the crossfire of this fighting for some time now, as have other sites, so it's obviously of great concern.
I mean, are you trying to coordinate with UNESCO or some other bodies in any kind of bid to stop any potential destruction of these sites?
I think it's challenging. I mean, when you talk about who could stop ISIL from destroying them, I think that's a pretty challenging thing to do. We've certainly called on them not to. This is a tough fight here, though.
Maria, I just want to follow up on the issue of strategy. I mean, ISIS apparently has a strategy. I mean, now they control a large geography, probably larger than any other Arab country in Asia, except for Saudi Arabia. So they do have.
I'm not sure your square footage is right there, Saeed, but continue.
Well, they control whatever, half of Syria. They control large.
We don't
portions
think they
of Iraq.
control half of Syria.
Fine. I mean, they control large areas, bigger than many of the countries in the Arab world. They seem to have a solid strategy. That's not a ragtag kind of hit and run operation.
We have never said they were ragtag. We have never said that.
So they do have basically they do have an address. They have a place. They have command and control. Obviously, why not have a strategy that is just as robust?
We have a strategy that's more robust, and can I tell you what it's done? It's taken out parts of their command and control. It's taken out their communications. It's taking out their majority funding source when it comes to taking out the oil, including in Syria. So we have a strategy that is choking off their funding, that is taking off their fighters, that is cutting off ways for them to get more foreign fighters, that's taking them off the battlefield every single day, including right now. The U.S. Air Force that is operating in and around Ramadi, searching for ISIL targets, and is going to do so until Ramadi is retaken. So I can assure you that that's a strategy, and that's one we're going to keep pursuing.
My last question on this. Are you disturbed by the fact that they are using U.S.-supplied weapons, and now you are going to give them even more shoulder-carried rockets and so on?
Who's they? Sorry, who are you referring to?
ISIL. I'm sorry.
Well,
ISIL. ISIL is using American-supplied weapons, and now you're going to supply more sort of shoulder-carried rockets and anti-tank missiles and so on. That may very well fall into their hands.
I think the Pentagon has spoken to some of the specifics there on the specific weapons, but of course, any time weapons that we provide to a partner falls into the hands of someone like ISIL, that's something that's very disturbing to us, of course. That is. So, yep.
What's your reaction to the visit today by the Prime Minister?
I just asked a question on Iraq before we move on.
We're still working on Iraq, actually.
Sorry, I thought about the visit.
No, I think it's a visit to Iraq,
My
right?
apologies.
I think it's a visit of the Prime Minister of
Moscow
Iraq.
today. He insisted on. He said some powers discouraged him from going to Russia, but he insisted because he wanted to stress the importance of his interest in cooperation and cooperating with Russia and getting support from them. I mean, if he's asking for full support from Russia, will the U.S. welcome the Russian to be part of the coalition against ISIL?
Well, they're not, I think, technically a part of the coalition, and we understand this was a long-planned trip by the Prime Minister as he continues to expand relationships with Iraq and other countries around the world. Iraq certainly has the right to pursue military equipment from Russia and a variety of countries to fulfill their legitimate defense needs. We've long said every country can play a role in degrading and defeating ISIL. As you know, we and Iraq have a long, growing, very large FMS sales program to Iraq. We provide things to Iraq that no one else can. So I think that's certainly what we're focused on.
The U.S. official talked with Abadi after the fall of Ramadi?
Has anyone spoken to the Prime Minister?
Yeah.
I'm guessing we have. We've been in contact with a variety of Iraqi officials since the fall of Ramadi. I am happy to check and see specifically who that is.
Thank you.
Matt?
I just had two brief ones. One, in terms of the question that you were just asked a little while ago about Palmyra and what your concerns are. Yeah, I understand. There are monuments there that are historic, priceless.
Yeah.
But your concerns are broader than that, right?
Of
I mean, there are
course.
people there as well. I mean, live human beings. So it's not just.
Of course, we're concerned about the fate of the
Okay.
residents there. Of course, people are tending to ask about the historic sites, though. That's
Yeah,
why I
but let me
referenced
just
them.
point out that there are people there, and there's pictures of
I,
butchery and slaughter in the streets.
including people being held at a prison there, I think, a pretty notorious
Correct.
prison. And
So I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
there is a concern. And then the second thing
believe
is,
me, there is.
you kept repeating over and over that there will be days like this, meaning I presume bad days.
Right.
How many more of these bad days are you guys prepared to accept? I mean, can you foresee a time when Baghdad is threatened, or Damascus, or I mean?
I'm just not going to speculate on that. I'm really not.
But you're prepared to.
I'm
But you
really
said
not.
before that you're prepared to accept these kind of short-term bad days without
That-
without reviewing.
Not to
Hold on, wait.
accept, but that we understand they will happen.
Okay, well, that's an acceptance of a kind, and you say there's no formal review of the strategy.
True.
So how many more bad days will it take for there to be a review of this strategy?
Matt, I mean, if you talk about a strategy for how you fight a conflict, built into any strategy is the fact that every day isn't going to be a day you win or a good day on the battlefield. Look at any conflict we've had throughout history. If every time there was a setback on the battlefield, we redid our entire strategy, what would that have looked like? That's just not common sense.
I don't know what it would have looked like, but
But it's
this
just not common sense here.
But
Look,
you're saying-
overall, ISIL has continued to be pushed back out of populated areas. They've lost about 25% of that populated area that they used to hold. That's the right trajectory. We're going to help the Iraqis retake Ramadi in the 96 plus hours since they lost Ramadi. They've regrouped on the outside of town. We've helped them consolidate those lines. We're helping them plan for a counterattack. So we'll keep watching this going forward here, but built into any military strategy is the fact that there will be setbacks.
But as you look at whether or not the 25% that you and others have said, in terms of populated areas,
Right.
If you look at the territory that ISIS controls as a red blotch between Iraq and Syria, the blotch is getting bigger. Is it not?
I'm not sure about that. Let me check on that. We believe we are in Iraq. We are pushing them out of territory.
Right. Well, in Iraq and Syria.
I understand, but
the bleeding is. I mean,
the strategy is a
the
little
red is
different in
getting
each
bigger.
place. The challenge is a little different in each place. That's why I'm distinguishing between the two. Yes.
It's just two questions. I'm sorry if you have already responded to them because I came a little bit late. The first one about just about the strategy. The strategy is called degrade and defeat ISIL.
Correct.
Like now, like what would you tell Iraqis when they might ask you how significant have you degraded ISIL over the past 10 months since you started bombing ISIL?
Well, I think we've talked about some of the metrics in here, whether it's pushing them out of territory they've held in populated areas, which we've helped them do, whether it's cutting off their communication, taking out parts of their command and control, taking out their leaders, cutting off their main source of funding, which was oil, and which is no longer their main source of funding because of our military action. There are all these different ways we look at whether we're making progress. Is it a tough fight? Yes. But you can see tangible progress in places. There have been setbacks, as we've seen in Ramadi, but if you look at retaking Mount Sinjar, retaking Mosul Dam, there are things you can point to over the last 10 months, almost a year now, to point to that.
Gains outweigh the setbacks?
Well, I'm just not, I would say that the gains outweigh the setbacks, but at some point, it doesn't matter until the goal is met, which is that we degrade and defeat ISIL.
One more question about the Popular Mobilization Forces. I just want to have a clear, your clear position on that. I know you had been reluctant in the fight for Tikrit to cooperate or coordinate with them because they're backed by Iran. But now in the fight for Ramadi, what's your position exactly about their participation, which has been asked by Prime Minister of Iraq
Well,
Haider al-Abadi.
and I addressed that a little bit, but basically it's that, the prime minister consulting with the different parts of his government and representatives of the different sectarian pieces of the country have talked about this, about them being part of this effort. We think everything needs to be under Iraqi command and control, obviously, as it can be on the ground, and that this is really an ongoing process here that Prime Minister Abadi is running, and we'll be watching it. I think let's go to the back now.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about strategy, Marie, and clearly there have been some successes. As you say, you're pushing them out of the populated areas. Was the strategy wrong, though, that you lost the strategically significant town of Ramadi? I mean, it's given you a huge public relations disaster, and it's also deflated many people because they don't think that you are actually now on top of the war against ISIL. It has given them a massive boost and may actually help with the recruitment.
Who are you? Who
ISIL.
is it deflated?
Well, I think we both understand that I'm talking about ISIL. It's not just a random
Who is
them.
it deflated? I guess I'm trying to... Pundits or who?
Well, the Iraqis. It can't be
Okay.
great for them to see the strategic important town of Ramadi being lost when the US military is there in an advisory and training capacity and has, in your own words, has this strategy on how to beat ISIL.
Well, I think the Iraqis, first of all, over the last 10 months have actually seen the Iraqi armed forces, backed up by the U.S., have many successes as well. They've seen them retake Mosul Dam. They've seen them retake Mount Sinjar. They've seen them push ISIL out of 25% of the territory used to hold in populated areas. And now there are all these people who live in those areas who are no longer living under ISIL. I also think the Iraqi people, and I don't pretend to speak for them, I know you just were, but see that the Iraqi army on the outskirts of Ramadi now, unlike what we saw in Mosul, has held their positions outside of Ramadi. They're consolidating those lines. We're helping them plan for a counterattack. We have aircraft flying over Ramadi, and hopefully we will be able to help them retake Ramadi. I think the Iraqi people understand this is going to be a long and tough fight, and they see the kind of enemy they're up against. They see the United States standing there with them, helping them have some success, and when there are setbacks, helping them recover and helping them push forward.
Let me just follow up on that. And I don't claim to speak for the Iraqi people, although I have seen quotes from Iraqi people, including Iraqi people who saw their army run from Ramadi when the ISIL moved in, and who saw police officers going around asking businesses and locals for money to buy weapons because they didn't have enough weapons to defend themselves or their city. How does that fit into the US strategy?
Well, I think what our experts tell me is that when the Iraqi army faced the ISIL challenge in Ramadi, it was actually very different, for example, from the situation they faced in ISIL, where we did talk about people basically just putting down their weapons and fleeing. That's not actually what happened in Ramadi. They engaged in a very serious and sustained fight against ISIL. It was one where they were overpowered by an incredibly strong and well-armed challenge from ISIL. So they retreated outside of the city. They are regrouping. That doesn't mean this wasn't a big setback. Nobody's sugarcoating that. But I think in a conflict like this, you have ebbs and flows on the battlefield, and what matters ultimately is if we can get back on track, get the Iraqi army back on track and help them retake Ramadi.
So you're not degrading to the extent where they can't launch major offensives to retake an important strategic city?
Well, certainly this is a process to degrade them. We've degraded their capabilities in a number of areas. As I said, we've cut off their main source of funding. That's having an impact. We're taking fighters off the battlefield every single day. That's having an impact. But we've always said that ISIL is incredibly capable. They're much more capable than AQI ever was, for example, and they have the ability to launch these kinds of attacks. But every day we are degrading that ability, and we're going to keep doing it. The Iraqis are going to keep doing it, and ultimately we believe they will be defeated.
Some local sources in Iraq have said that 6,000 Iraqi troops were defeated by as many as 150 ISIS fighters.
I saw some of those numbers. I just can't confirm them. I've seen them. I'm happy to check with our team again.
Do you have your own assessment?
I'm happy to check with our team.
Do you have confidence in the capability of the Iraqi armed forces that you have trained and spent billions of dollars on?
We do. Look, this is a tough fight. This is a tough fight.
But certainly they are better armed, better equipped.
They're better
supplied,
armed, they're better trained,
than
and we
the
actually
ISIS
saw
fighters.
that in the difference between what happened in Mosul and what happened in Ramadi. That doesn't mean this wasn't a huge setback, but look, we're focused on how we can keep making them better.
Okay, let me ask you this last question on Ramadi, because it seems that the armed forces in Ramadi are composed of Sunni tribes, and maybe they have their allegiance with ISIL. I mean, have you ever considered that? Perhaps structuring an army that is based on sectarian divides
I haven't
is wrong?
I haven't heard that, Saeed, and I just don't want to sort of go down that road. Yes, Matt, and then Justin.
Well, I just want to, I mean, all this talk about degrading them and the strategy is
Yeah.
working and that you're taking fighters off the battlefield every day and that you cut off their source of revenue. It strikes me as somewhat contradictory that if they are being degraded, how is it that they've managed to capture these two significant cities? Granted, the circumstances are different. I mean, it doesn't
Because they
seem to-
still have significant capabilities. They came in with a lot of capabilities. We've degraded a lot, but there's still a lot of work to do. I think you're familiar with how long these conflicts can take sometimes. This is a very well-equipped group. Yes.
Do you have any comment on what's just taken place now? Is that the tribal fighters have said that Islamic State has just overrun the Iraqi government defenses east of Ramadi.
I hadn't seen that. I'm happy to check with our folks on the ground.
Marie,
Justin,
I have a
I'm gonna go to Justin first.
Well, this is on a different subject, so.
Oh, well then let's
I have a
finish Iraq
question on
first.
ISIL for
Yeah,
you.
or ISIL.
This week, Fred Hoff of the Atlantic Council wrote a piece that said that the operational absence of the Obama administration in protecting the Syrian civilians and that, quote, willingness of the Obama administration to make do with moralistic rhetoric about Assad regime, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. How should we interpret such criticism that the Obama administration has been in action or has been absent in helping the Syrian civilians?
Well, I mean, I just fundamentally disagree with the notion. I think if you look at what Secretary Kerry, what the President, what Ambassador Power at the UN have both spoken up on and done to support the humanitarian needs of the Syrian people who are caught in the middle of a conflict between a number of different actors here under very difficult circumstances, I think that I just disagree with that notion. Justin? On Iraq?
Yes.
Let's finish Iraq on this one.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Has the U.S. determined that the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are under the control of the ISF? And does that mean that airstrikes can only be called in by the ISF? Or if the U.S. believes the militias are being managed by the ISF, will the militias be able to call in airstrikes?
Iraqi airstrikes? Because only U.S. can call in U.S. airstrikes. Are you talking about
right.
Iraqi airstrikes?
So, well, okay. So then I'll go to my first question. Has the U.S. determined that the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are under control of the ISF?
That's certainly what we've said needs to happen. I'm happy to check with our team and see what the latest is on that.
Okay, but we haven't, okay.
I just don't have an answer. I'll check. Yes, Justin.
I want to go to our favorite subject, Clinton emails.
Great.
I know that you've seen the New York Times piece today, and my first question about it is they actually link to electronic copies of these emails. Can you confirm or deny that those emails that they link on their website are in fact the Benghazi-related emails from Clinton's
So a
email
couple of
account?
points. First, I can neither confirm nor deny the authenticity of the documents published by the New York Times. The department has not shared Secretary Clinton's emails with any news organization. Some of the folks have asked us that as well. I can also say that we will be releasing very, very soon the first set we said we would release of the documents that have already been provided to the committee that are related to Benghazi, as we talked about under the FOIA process with FOIA standards. We will be doing that very, very soon.
Okay.
And we can all have that discussion then, I'm sure.
And I'm sure we will, right. So a little bit of a refresher to things I know that we talked about and asked about a few weeks ago when this first came about. But one of the things that we need to get a good sense of is whether it is against policy or permissible for an employee such as the Secretary of State to be sending sensitive but unclassified email through a non-government email account. Is that permissible or is that problematic?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into the specifics and talk about something that's online. In general, sensitive but unclassified information, to remind folks, as a refresher, is not a classification designation. It's not a national security classification. Several different categories of information can be considered SBU. There's really a range. It's pretty expansive of what can be considered SBU. There is a difference between information that's sort of not appropriate for posting online versus information that could damage our security. I think we've talked about this as well. We've talked about the fact that in general, when possible, SBU should be handled in certain ways. We've talked about this numerous times in here as well. But as we've also said, it is permissible under limited circumstances to use personal email for unclassified purposes. And again, SBU is not a classification.
Do you have any concern?
We do have, I would say though, and we've talked about this, and we'll get into this more, I'm sure, but we do have systems and rules designed to protect that information. And, you know, employees in general are instructed to use that system, but it's worth noting that from time to time, employees may use their judgment to send SBU information over a non-SBU system. That's also written into our rules.
Okay.
So do you have any concerns that, does this department have any concerns that the Secretary of State was receiving and sending sensitive information to outside advisors such as Sidney Blumenthal about Chris Stevens' whereabouts and, you know, the danger that he was in?
Again, I'm not going to get into any way the contents of what has been posted online by the New York Times. We will, as we have promised to do, be releasing this first tranche of Secretary Clinton's emails, the ones that have already been for months provided to the Select Committee, and I'm sure we will have many conversations about the contents then.
Is there a distinction then between sending around SBU material using a non-state system to outside of the network recipients versus inside the network? In other words, basically to that question, to Jackie's question, is that permissible?
I'm just not going to get into those specifics until we...
Well, not asking specifically about what she may or may not have done, but in general, when you're dealing with SBU under those limited permissible circumstances where you can use your non-government email, is there some restriction on sharing that with other non-government emails?
Well, as I said, the FAM acknowledges that the Foreign Affairs Manual, the FAM acknowledges that employees may from time to time use their judgment to send SBU information over a non-SBU system. And I would also note there's a difference between sending it and receiving it as well.
No, hold on just one second. You said that they're going to be released very, very soon, like in the next 30 seconds or so. Can you be a little bit more specific?
Well, if it's released in the next 30 seconds, then I'm just going to run away from this podium. No, I can't be more specific, but I assure you it will be as soon as we are finished with this, we hope to get them out.
All right, well, yeah, before the week, I mean, we're talking about Memorial Day weekend here.
I am going to the Indy 500 as I do every year this weekend, so you all know my plans. So believe me, we won't be releasing them on Saturday or Sunday or Monday. But they will be released very soon. So when we have more to share on that, we can.
All right, and once they are released, let's just assume for a second, and I know you don't want to assume anything, that the documents that were published today by the New York Times are in fact correct. So,
well, let me speak to that generally, though, before you ask your question. In general, the documents, these 290 some emails that were provided to the committee were provided with almost no redactions that were not under FOIA standards, under an agreement with the committee to do so. When these are released through the FOIA process, there will be FOIA exemptions in there. So there's a different standard between what goes to Congress that doesn't go to the public and what is released under the standard FOIA process that is governed by that regulation. So when her emails are released, just to set expectations, there will be things exempted under the standard FOIA process.
So you're suggesting then that these emails that were published today came from the committee?
I'm not suggesting anything.
Okay.
I am not. I'm saying the department has not released any emails. Right. I am not. I've learned never to guess where things come from in anonymous stories anymore.
But once you have put them all out with your redactions in them,
correct,
you will be able to talk about
the content,
correct, and whether or not and provide more specific answers to Justin's questions about SBU information
and about content in them. Absolutely, that is correct, and I look forward to doing that.
But at the moment, until that happens,
I will not.
It's basically a waste of our time to continue to ask.
I would never use that term about your questions, Matt, but I'm not going to be able to answer them.
Emails.
Last email question.
Okay. Last but the best.
It's a high bar for yourself. You have to live up to it now.
At a recent Newsmaker event at the Press Club, there were 4 experts who did give their views, including Jason Barron, the former director of NARA, the National Archives. And they argued that the basic system is flawed.
Overall in the government?
Yes, that different departments are not putting enough money for saving or archiving
Mhm.
these records. And you know the new rule that's coming in by 2016, 2019.
Mhm.
And so how far the State Department has, put funds, is working on it?
No,
Because
and that's a very good question. And we've talked a lot about how, even over the course of Secretary Clinton's tenure, different guidances kept coming out, things kept having to be clarified by NARA and others because the regulations or were unclear, they were contradictory, there just wasn't a lot of clarity. So this has been an ongoing process that the federal government has been undertaking for many years. We've certainly, you referenced the new guidelines. It is something that has historically across the government, I think, probably been underfunded as well, because there's a lot of different priorities here. But I think Secretary Kerry, I know Secretary Kerry, having spoken to him about this, and he sent the letter to the Inspector General, if you all remember, feels very strongly that we at the State Department need to take a hard look at how we do everything from records management to retention to FOIA requests, and really see how we can get more efficient, how we can improve our processes given the changing nature of technology, given the sheer amount of volume of electronic records we all have now. And I think that's something he's been very focused on going forward.
so
Yes,
you
and-
think the State Department will meet the deadlines 2016, 2019?
I certainly have not heard otherwise. Yes, in the back.
I'm sorry that I got late. It is about another topic. Is
Okay.
there any progress with the conversation with Cuba?
So I addressed this a little bit at the beginning. No, it's okay. But
you.
you're lucky because I said I didn't have any updates, so you didn't miss anything. Talks are ongoing, and we'll get you a readout as soon as we can. I'm sorry, I don't have an update for the briefing.
While we're on that, can I just throw in another, going
Yes.
into today's talk, since you don't have a readout,
Yes.
would you say that the main outstanding issue was the legality of the training courses being offered at the U.S. interest section in Havana? And is the United States willing to reach some kind of agreement with the Cuban government, say the education ministry, on how those courses are run?
I think, just candidly, there are a number of outstanding issues on each side. I wouldn't want to say that there was one outstanding issue, and I'll look forward to getting more of a readout from our team. Leslie, I think you wanted to go somewhere
Yes,
else.
I want to go to Ukraine.
Okay.
And can you confirm and give us a readout on, there's a conversation, the Russian Foreign Ministry just said that Kerry spoke to Lavrov this
Yes,
morning?
they just got off the phone right before I came out here, though, so I don't have a readout yet, but I will get one for
Is
you.
it has anything to do with the OSCE said today that the fighting had become worrisome, the spread of violence had become worrisome in eastern Ukraine?
Let me check.
Was it?
Let me check. Yes.
On this topic?
Yes.
There's been a lot of, over the past few months, instances where you and your colleagues have noted concern about movement of Russian military assets near the border with Ukraine. There was a piece...
Not just near, but over
Sure.
the border.
There was a piece in the Daily Beast a few days ago suggesting that this was Putin gearing up for a major summer offensive against the Ukrainian military. Is there any concern in this building that that could be the case, that we could be seeing a real offensive?
I'm
here?
certainly happy to check with our team. All I can tell you, I haven't heard that, but all I can tell you is that our meetings in Sochi last week, was that last week now? As Secretary Kerry said, the Russians publicly and privately committed to the implementation of Minsk, and that's what we think they need to do. But I'm happy to see if there's more to share.
At this point, you're not yet at the point of saying that the Minsk II agreement is a failure.
No, not at all. In fact, I think the Secretary said that was the best path forward here in terms of de-escalation. Yes, in the back.
Can I just ask one question about Cuba?
I think we're still on Ukraine. Let's finish Ukraine and then
Okay.
you can go on. Yes.
Just very quickly,
The Ukraine Parliament today annulled 5 security agreements that they had with Moscow, which were in place, had been in place for some time, and included things like being able to purchase weapons that are only produced in Ukraine. These have been suspended since the start of the conflict, but now they've annulled them, and it makes it, obviously, if they're going to reinstate them at some future point, they have to go back to Parliament. I just wondered if the United States was at all concerned about this move.
Well, given Russian military intervention in Ukraine, Ukraine has been moving incrementally to slow or halt different forms of military cooperation with Russia. In this case, we understand that the Ukrainian legislature moved to terminate a Ukrainian-Russian agreement allowing the passage of Russian military units temporarily stationed in Moldova via Ukrainian territory. We understand, though, that today's actions in the Rada will not affect military-to-military cooperation within the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, which I think we've talked about before, nor will it affect the implementation of the Minsk agreements via the Trilateral Contact Group and its working groups, which is, of course, key there.
Can I change topics?
You can.
Okay. Iran. I just want to go back to something that you said yesterday. I'm sorry I wasn't here.
It's okay.
But on the issue of questioning Iranian scientists, is that would be like something to undo the whole deal or the whole process if the Iranians insist that their scientists will not be questioned?
Well, as I said, and we've said a number of times since Lausanne, we and the Iranians agreed to undertake a process to develop a list for access in terms of the PMD issue. The people and places on that list are an ongoing topic of conversation, but we will not agree to any final agreement that doesn't meet what we need to get out of that piece of it.
Was that issue not discussed throughout the 18 months of negotiations? Why is it coming up now?
It was discussed, and that's why we said we agreed to undertake a process to put together a list. It has been discussed.
So you think that the Supreme Leader, by saying they will not be questioned, is basically trying to undo the deal?
I'm not going to speculate on that. Look, we don't negotiate in public. We've never said we would negotiate in public. Often different parties say different things in public, but what we're focused on is what's agreed to in the negotiating room and ultimately what Iran implements, which we saw in the JPOA, where we also saw various Iranian leaders making different statements, but what mattered was that they implemented it.
And finally, today there are meetings of technical teams and so on, I assume.
Yes.
Or tomorrow.
They've been ongoing in Vienna.
Ongoing. Okay.
At
So
the
what are
technical
they
level.
discussing? I mean, would that be one of the issues that they need to arrive at?
There's a number of
conclusion?
issues that they're discussing.
I wondered if I could just ask on this. It seems one of the issues, or one of the problems might be that the Iranians are asking for a 24-day delay for authorized visits.
I
from
saw
the
that the French mentioned
yes,
that.
they did, yes.
Yeah, and that's certainly, I think, and let me just get what I have on that. What do I have? That the exact details of the inspection regime are still being worked out. We expect to come to a solution that will give us and the IAEA the assurances we need with regards to access and transparency. And as we've said all along, if we don't get what we need, we won't say yes.
24 days would be too long.
I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other.
Well, why not? I mean, it would
Because
seem
I'm not going to negotiate in public.
Well, I don't think this is a negotiation.
Well,
Do you
commenting
think
on a
that-
specific proposal
do you
in one
think
way or
that-
the other would be negotiating in public.
Do you think that 3 weeks, more than 3 weeks, is you can still have an inspection that meets your goals?
All
more
I
than
can
3
say
weeks
is we will
notice?
not accept an inspection regime which we do not agree with.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say more than that.
Well, that's fine, except that leaves open the idea that the administration might be willing to accept 24-day
I didn't-
notice, which I think to anyone gets 24 days notice of anything. That's not a snap inspection. That's not even a
Well, I'm happy
inspection
to
at
take your
early-
position on board back to the negotiating team, but I'm not ruling it in or out. I'm just saying I'm not going to negotiate in public and comment on specific alleged proposals.
Okay, so it would be accurate then to say that the administration will not rule out a 24-hour,
I think it would be
24-day.
more accurate to say that I wouldn't comment on it or that I wouldn't rule it in or out because you're assuming there's a
okay.
positive side to this when I'm actually trying to stay quite neutral.
Why would you stay neutral on something like
Because
that?
we don't negotiate in public, Matt, and we don't. Every time someone said,
Marie, this is not the Iranians
let me
negotiating.
finish.
This is the French.
Let me finish.
This is your partner in
We-
the negotiations,
let me
not the
finish.
Iranians floating something out there.
As we have always said, every time there's a specific proposal put out there in public, every single time, we are very clear that we're just not going to say yes or no to specific proposals in public. We do that at the negotiating table.
Well, here's a proposal that's been thrown out by the Iranians. They won't accept any inspections or any interviewing of the scientists, and you say that that's not acceptable to
I've
you.
said what they agreed to in Lausanne and that we need to get an agreement we are happy with, but I haven't said what that specifically would look like.
So, in other words, it is also possible that the United States could accept a situation in which the Iranians would not allow access to military sites and
No,
access.
I've
Well, then you're ruling something out, and you're
That's a-
thereby
but
negotiating
That's a
in public.
general look. We outlined the general things we need. Yes, I have said we won't accept something that doesn't cut off the plutonium pathway to rock. Just like we won't accept something that doesn't give us access and transparency into possible military dimensions of their program. And also, we will not accept something less than what we need on access and transparency. I'm not going to get into a number of days and whether or not that's good or not good or sufficient or not sufficient. That's a very specific negotiating position that's different than the general principles guiding our negotiating positions. And I
I'm
know
not-
you understand that. You just
No.
want me to weigh in on 24 days.
No,
Yes,
no,
let's
no,
move
no.
on.
I don't understand why saying that a period of time that is longer than 3 weeks, you can't say would not meet the requirement to have a snap
Because
inspection.
I'm not going to publicly outline what our requirements are for a very
Okay.
specific negotiating detail. Why would I outline that here and not outline it at the
I don't know,
negotiating
maybe
table
to
with the
stop
Iranians?
all the criticism that's coming at you from people
If
who
every
are very
time-
dubious of whether this deal will accomplish
Well,
what it
we
will.
talk to a lot of those people in closed settings and
Mhm.
classified settings when we can.
Can I just ask? I asked yesterday when Wendy Sherman was likely to go back. Do you have?
We
that?
don't know yet.
Okay.
No.
I have a related
She's in
question.
Canada today, though.
Can you, this is somewhat related to Iran, but not really. It has to do with the NPT and
Yes.
and this conference. Can you explain to us what exactly the U.S. position is on convening a conference for a nuclear free Middle East?
Convening a conference? Well, are you referring to what's being discussed at the NPT review conference?
I'm referring to whatever it is that has got the Israelis so upset this
Right.
latest
Well,
time, and
At-
why
At least
Tom
according
Country-
to one story.
right, and why Tom Countryman flew there.
Well, that predated
Yeah,
any of this.
yeah,
So
but
the NPT review
what's he
conference
explaining
is
to
in
us?
its final week in New York. There's no final text on this issue of the Middle East conference. We are working to ensure that a final text meets our interests and those of Israel. Both the United States and Israel support the creation of a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. We're closely working with our Israeli partners to advance our mutual interests, including preserving the NPT. Given there's no final text, this is something we're working behind the scenes and don't have much more to share than that.
Right, but they seem
I think I can only do a few
They-
more, guys.
they
Wait, let's not all
the
yell at
Isra-
once. I can
Israeli
just only do
officials
a few
seem to
more.
be very concerned that this is somehow
I
going
think
to.
that may just be one Israeli official that I've seen anonymously talking to one reporter. In the conversations we've had with Israeli officials, they understand that we are working to ensure that a final text meets both our interests and those of Israel.
Okay, but what are those interests? And I'm not quite sure I understand why they are so upset about this, if in fact there's
Why
no
one
reason.
official anonymously seems to be concerned, I don't know either. You can call that official. We're just gonna, guys, I can only do a
Follow up on
few
this.
more, I'm sorry.
Yeah, very quickly. I just very
Let's do key
very quickly
questions
follow up.
all at once, though. Go
Okay,
ahead.
on this issue,
Mhm.
in the future, if it ever comes to pass that the Middle East is declared as a nuclear weapons-free zone, it should include Israel, right?
I don't have much more to share for you than this.
Follow-up on this?
Yep.
About the conference, do you have any position on whether or not the officials should go to Hiroshima or Nagasaki? Has been like a subject of debate.
I
over the
haven't
past few
seen
weeks.
that. Let me check on that. Actually, I promised I'd go to you on Cuba. Yes.
According to, it's a question about Cuba, and according to CNN, the Cuban leader Castro said, in order to normalize the bilateral relations, the embargo has to be lifted. And from the hearing yesterday, we heard a lot of harsh criticism from the senators. So I wonder, how would you guys to work with the Congress to lift the embargo?
Well, I didn't see those reported comments. We've been working with the Cubans on the issue of reestablishing diplomatic relations and opening an embassy. So obviously our position on the embargo is well known, but I think that's a little separate from the process we've been undertaking to reestablish diplomatic relations.
But it looks like the Cuba has a different definition.
I'm not
from
sure
yours.
that's true. I'm happy to check. Yes. Yes.
Yesterday, you were asked about the chair of the State Duma, Sergei Naryshkin of Russia, visiting Tokyo and meeting with officials there. Since then, he met with Prime Minister. This is given that this is someone who is under U.S. and EU sanctions. What's your position?
Yeah,
on
I
this?
mean, look, in general, I think that as we've said to our partners, including Japan, that it's not time for business as usual with Russia. I think some of the propaganda coming out even of just the secretary's visit, that somehow this is a way to walk back from our concerns on Ukraine is just crazy. I was there, and that's absolutely not the case. So in general, I think we'd tell any of our partners this isn't time for business as usual, particularly on the economic side. And I think that's certainly what we've conveyed to people.
So you would prefer that Japan not move forward with preparations for President Putin to visit?
don't have much more comment on that other than to say, this isn't time to do things as we've always been doing them with Russia. We work with them when we can, but again, a lot of the meetings last week was about issues where we differ quite a bit.
The prevailing view is that this meeting was to try to make progress on territorial issues that Japan has with Russia.
Okay, I'm happy to check on that piece.
Okay, because that's not an economic.
Yeah, no, I understand, and we've talked a lot about territorial issues, so let me check on that piece.
Turkey.
Uh-huh.
There's this Reuters story today that Turkish intelligence has sent weapons to the rebel-held areas in Syria, and some of which have likely fallen into the extremist hands. Have you seen that report?
I've seen it, but I'd refer you to the Turks.
But would you be worried if the Turks have actually done that?
I don't have much more on the report for you.
So you wouldn't be worried?
Pam, go ahead.
What is your assessment on these reports of the confrontation in the South China Seas between the U.S. surveillance plane and the Chinese military plane? And has the U.S. expressed any concerns to China about this incident?
Well, I don't, and I saw the video, I don't think I'd call it a confrontation. There were certainly warnings, verbal warnings given by the Chinese. It's unclear on what basis they issued these warnings. U.S. military planes operate in accordance with international law in disputed areas of the South China Sea. So the U.S. military has and will continue to operate consistent with the rights, freedoms, and lawful uses of the sea in the South China Sea. Again, it's unclear what the basis for these warnings was. I mean, I saw the video. There were some verbal warnings, but I don't think I'd call it a confrontation.
U.S. raise any concerns with China about the warnings?
I'm not sure if we did in general. When Secretary Kerry was in China recently, in every meeting he raised the issue of land reclamation in the South China Sea by China. That was an issue that repeatedly came up, but I'm not sure they raised this latest issue in Beijing.
Can you ask if there was any State Department involvement at all in what happened? I mean, post fact, if the Chinese complained. I'm not asking you to speak for the Pentagon. This was their plane. As far as I know, were there anyone from the State Department aboard the plane?
I don't think so.
Okay, so
just DOD and Jim Sciutto.
Okay.
Yeah, he was on the plane.
All right.
Yeah.
So, if there was a protest, anything having to do with this related to the State Department would be interesting, because I just don't know if there was any State Department involvement.
I do not know either. We're going to do two more.
Question on Tunisia. It's regarded as one of the successes,
Yes.
one of the few successes of the Arab Spring. The US has given a lot of military support to the Tunisian government at their request. Given comments by the Secretary of State and also the President that, poverty is one of the root causes of extremism, should the US be doing more in giving economic and financial aid to Tunisia?
Well, I think we're also giving quite a bit of economic support funding to Tunisia as well, and I think we put out a whole fact sheet today on a lot of what that new funding will look like. I think the White House released it, so I'd point you there. Yes.
The last one on Tunisia, very quickly.
Sure.
Do you have details about this major non-NATO ally status which could be granted to...
I don't. Let me check with our team on that.
Can I sneak one more? Thanks. On Qatar.
Sure.
This is
the meeting I was supposed to be at 20 minutes ago. I'm sure they're all watching the briefing on TV.
I think this will be short.
okay.
I was just
Go
wondering.
ahead,
There was
fine.
an Amnesty International report
Yes, I saw.
documenting labor abuses. Sponsors of the 2022 FIFA World Cup have also raised concerns. What's your take on this? Are you also communicating these kinds of concerns?
We've seen the report. We're reviewing it now. We welcomed a 2014 announcement by Qatar that they will transition from a sponsorship-based kafala system to a contract-based system for workers. I think we thought that was a good step forward. We're a strong supporter of labor rights globally, clearly, and we remain committed to working with governments, including Qatar's and civil society organizations, workers' organizations, to making sure that workers get the rights they deserve.
You are aware that the claim made in this Amnesty report is that they have not made any progress, or very, very little, on
that 2014 announcement, and we're reviewing the report right now.
You know, that's a system that all GCC countries use, the kafala system.
Thank you for adding that to the transcript.
The Secretary Blinken in Burma, in particular, do you know if he's had a chance to raise the issue of the Rohingyas?
He has. He met with the Burmese president, the foreign minister, the parliamentary speaker, and the commander-in-chief. In all of those meetings, he expressed our ongoing support for their democratic reforms and the elections, and also raised our deep concerns about the thousands of vulnerable migrants stranded at sea. He stressed the need for Burma to address the root causes of this migration, including the racially and religiously motivated discrimination and violence facing the Rohingya population in Rakhine State. He also met with Aung San Suu Kyi as well, where he talked about the importance of credible, inclusive, and transparent elections later this year and the situation in Rakhine State.
Thank you.
Thank you.